Welcome back to another episode of the Soul Sanctuary podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Snowden, and today I talk to Cheryl Greenfield. We talk about being empowered by trauma. As a retired nurse of 40 years service, Cheryl has always been a beacon of care. But now she's redirected that care to the profound realm of mindset and empowerment coaching. Her insights are deeply personal, powerful, and pivotal, having overcome the darkest of her own trauma. In today's episode, Cheryl brings invaluable insight that will resonate with parents, offering guidance on recognizing potential signs and how to safeguard your child against the impacts of potential trauma. Join us as we delve into the transformative journey of Cheryl Greenfield and explore the boundless power of healing, resilience, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that anyone can not only survive in life, but thrive. And just a disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast may include discussions about sensitive and potentially triggering topics related to sexual trauma. We want to emphasize that while we aim to provide support, information, and insight, this episode is not a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. If you or someone you know is in need of immediate assistance or is struggling with the effects of sexual trauma, we strongly recommend reaching out to mental health professionals or a support organization that specializes in trauma and healing. Please be aware that some parts of this episode may contain personal stories and experiences that could be distressing for some listeners. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Cheryl. I'm really excited to have you on as a guest. I have one question that I ask everyone before we begin. What is it that lights your soul up? What makes you feel alive? What gets you excited about life? What's that one thing? Or is there a few different things?
Well, probably two things. One, my grandbabies. I love watching them grow. I love watching their curiosity and just watching them experience life. And it's fun to sit back and watch them in action. So that's probably my number one. But other than that, it's my passion. My passion lights me up. You know, I worked 40 years as a nurse and I retired from that so that I could now do my passion, which is taking my trauma that I've used to empower myself to take that out and empower other people of trauma and not live with that inner critic.
It's a beautiful gift to give yourself and other people, because there's so many people out there in this world that have trauma on various degrees, right? There's the sexual trauma, there's physical trauma, there's medical trauma, there's accidents and trauma that happen after that. And I find that your teachings and the information that you have to give to people really help kind of all encompassing of that, to observe it, to cradle it and care for it, and in a way that doesn't feel like you have to hate yourself anymore. That grace is so important.
Yes. And it's really interesting that you say that, because I have said it for a long time. Trauma is trauma. And it doesn't matter if it's trauma of my sort that was sexual versus military war trauma versus a car accident. It's all the same in the idea of the mind. And it's what happens within our mind that causes our reactions. And all the trauma lands pretty much the same because it's an event with significant emotional impact. And that gets buried in your subconscious mind. And then that's where you start getting that programming of that inner critic where I'm not worthy enough, or I'm broken with this because this happened to me. And then pretty soon, everyone, no matter what the trauma is, starts seeing life through the lens of trauma. And it's filtered through that lens of trauma. And that's not a good filter to see life through. And so it just starts this cycle then that you just stay in that loop. It's the same loop over and over. I'm not worthy. I'm broken. The world is not a good place to be in. And then, yep, that's how I feel. And it just continues because you're viewing it from that lens. And that's the cycle that needs to be broken. And again, it doesn't matter if it's your trauma, my trauma, this kind of trauma, that kind of trauma. It's trauma. And the brain reacts the same in every situation.
I love that you used, like when you said it's the same and it's impactful, I pictured like a speeding train going along a track and then getting derailed and impacting something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just stuck in that loop of that moment of impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that
Mm-hmm.
the lens in which you see everything with is through that lens of impact. And and by playing that over and over and over again, it really does belittle you. It makes you feel less than, makes you feel small, makes you feel like you're not worthy, you can't do whatever it is, or even worse, it makes you feel like you deserved it, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which with the types of trauma like that you experienced, it's hard not to feel that way when it's kind of it was something that happened over and over. To feel like you deserved anything better is really hard to get out of that loop. So explain to me how you did that, and if you want to give the backstory of your story and then that pivotal point where it changed for you.
Sure.
To be like, enough is enough.
Yeah, exactly. Because that is what happened to me.
Yeah.
So I was sexually abused by my uncle for 6 years from the age of 12 to 18. And he was super manipulative, threatening, and threatened me into silence. And I held that secret for 45 years. I didn't tell a soul. That was a heavy weight to carry. And it obviously affected me in my life. It affected my health. It affected my relationships. And there's 3 sections people go through, or they can go through. One is they stay in victim mode, right? And people can live a lifetime in victim mode. Now, lucky for me, it was about 4 years post trauma, the actual physical trauma. Mental trauma remained because he actually, even into adulthood and through adulthood, threatened. Okay. But the physical trauma stopped. In about 4 years, I was able to start surviving through counseling. And that's where I spent most of my life, was in survival mode. And most people are happy if they survive trauma. And congratulations if you did. If you're alive, you survived it, right? And if you're living as a survivor, again, congratulations, but you don't want to live there. I lived there for 40 years-ish. And what that looks like for me, at least, was going through the motions of life. It was very bland. It was very dreary. I was depressed. I was anxious. I could put on a mask of happiness and fake being the happy wife, the happy mother, the happy daughter, and just go through the motions. But down inside, I felt like I was that broken, like no good person. And there was nothing really that made me happy in life. And I lived that way all the time. And so what happened was in 2018, I got a call from my cousin, his daughter, who said, I need to talk to you. Her daughter just came to her. She was 18 and said her grandfather had been molesting her since age 9. And I was devastated because I thought I was the only one. My whole lifetime, I watched for signs. Like I really watched to pay attention because he would be at family events, right? And I was watching him. He was watching me too, because he would always make sure I knew that. And I was heartbroken, truly, because there was more than just me now. And I knew what that felt like. And so I knew right then what I was going to do. I was going to come forth because I knew the power he had, and he would spin it that she was just an angry child and not the believer, because he played the same game with me at one time, right? When I told him I was going to tell, but I never got to tell anyone. It stopped in his house. But and that's when it actually, the trauma flipped, by the way, and got worse after I stood up to him for me. So I know what she's gone through, right? And so I knew I was going to have to stand up. And to be honest, and this might sound very weird to people, but I was happy. I was happy because I'm like, now I can get this weight off of me, right? I can move forward. I can step forward into my own healing and just get this out and let everyone know why I was the way I was all these years. Okay. But I was not prepared for what happened next. I was blindsided by it. People judged me.
Right.
In the timeline, they think I was first. The police put together. And it's not just me and one other person. We're now at 122.
Holy Moses.
Who have been affected. Yeah.
Holy cow.
And it's family members, grandchildren, ball teams of girls he coached over the years. The list goes on and on. And people said to me, once they heard that I was probably the first, I heard things like, wow, I bet you feel guilty. You could have stopped all of this. And I was like, oh, now I should feel guilty. Wait, should I feel guilty? Wait. And I was very confused. And my fiance at the time actually said, you must have liked it since you didn't report it.
Wow.
And there were other really bad things that were said to me. Like, how could you put up with all that and you didn't tell anyone? Well, because he threatened to kill me and my family.
Right.
Right.
Right. And you were young.
And he made it clear. I was young. I was manipulated. When it started, I was super naive. I had no idea what was going on in the beginning, to be honest.
Right.
So I went into a very deep depression. And back in my 20s, I tried drugs, alcohol, even tried to kill myself once, but I wasn't successful. And that's when I started counseling. That's when I was, okay, I got to start counseling. So that was a pivotal point. But here in this point now, we're in 2019. And this one particular night, I was standing on the threshold of suicide. Like I sat there and designed the whole way I was going to do it.
Gosh.
And I went, I can't do this. Wait, what am I doing? I was just thinking it'd be easier to tap out and not deal with it all, right?
Right, right. Yep.
And it would have been. I mean, truly, it would have been. But that's not what needs to happen. I have grandbabies now. I have family. I have a life. And I knew I was in trouble. So I at least recognized it. When those thoughts came up, I recognized it. I'm like, no, I'm in trouble. I need some help here. And I did not want to go counseling again, only because it never got rid of my inner critic. My whole life, I have just beat myself up over this. And if I wasn't beating myself up, he was in my ear, right? And so I knew I was going to need maybe something different. And I didn't know what was out there. So I started doing research. And I literally came across a ad that said, you can be one thought away from changing your life. I was like, that seems quite simple to me. Really? Okay, I'm going to go look at this. It intrigued me enough. It like caught my attention enough that that I went over and I looked at it and I watched a program and I thought, okay, wait a minute, this makes sense. This has to do with laws. I like laws. I like black and white.
Right. Yeah.
Gray is kind of hard for me. And so I liked it. And so I called Delynn. She was the one doing this program, and talked with her. And I liked what she said. And I hired her as my coach. And I just started doing the work.
Right.
And I had never been taught how to think and how our brains work.
As most of us haven't, right? Most of us had no idea.
We had no idea.
Right.
And that is when, once I learned those principles and I could start putting those into practice, things started changing. I started figuring out I didn't have to live in trauma, in the toxic trauma I was currently living in. So I found the power to break that engagement and move forward. And that was pretty empowering. And then I found the power to quiet the inner critic and start moving forth. And I found the power on how to think about how to create your life. And I was able to handle a very large sum of debt that had been created in this relationship. And I conquered that using these principles. And that is how I slowly stepped away from my trauma and into what I call empowered by trauma. And it's that trauma that fuels me. And the one thing I found as I went through all of this material and through all the court processes and everything, that I will never be silenced again.
Beautiful.
We all need to stand up, and we all need to shout it from the rooftops if something has happened to you, and bring awareness to it, because too often it's shoved under rugs. Too often it's pushed into the back closet. Too often victims come forward, and when they come forward, they're a victim again, right? Because they're going to get re-victimized.
Yeah.
And then that's what happens. They throw down at the victim instead of the perpetrator.
So interesting that they do that.
Yeah.
And or the things that they said to you to give you more guilt and give you more shame. And it's just really intriguing how people respond to news like that. Well, first and foremost, the news about your uncle just turns the face of who he is inside out for so many people, I'm sure. So then people respond based on that, right? They think he's somebody totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And not just him, any perpetrator, anyone that's victimizing people. And they just can't get over that. So then they say the hurtful things, or they question your sanity or what have you, because for them, it's a coping mechanism, but it's really not. Like, if you're somebody that knows somebody that's gone through some really traumatizing things, please be kind. Please hold space. Mm-hmm. Please reserve your judgment for the situation, and just nobody makes that stuff up. Well, not people tend not to make that stuff up. I mean, there may be some people that do, but overall, probably a large percentage of people that are coming out with information like this, they're not doing it for more attention. No. Because their attention that they're getting is not the attention that they want ever.
No. And that's what I told people. I would never have come out if I'd known that's what I would have had to deal with. Right. I was blindsided by that. So, I tell people to be prepared.
Right.
In certain situations. Now, there's certain trauma that's not going to happen in, obviously. That's maybe more specific to sexual trauma, or or maybe accusing someone of domestic abuse or child abuse, and you're maybe saying your parents did it or your spouse has done domestic abuse to you. Again, it could be looked at like that. They could judge you for coming out, depending on how they're looked at in society. And my uncle actually was a pretty prominent person in society. He was military. He ran on the EMS squad in our town, and was on that board and different things like that. And he had a lot of different businesses, and so he was more prominent in society. So that may be where some of that came from. But even prominent people have secrets.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
nobody's perfect. And to
yeah,
think that any one of us are is just, it's all smoke and mirrors a lot of the time. I mean, even the most perfect people aren't perfect.
right, right. And we even recently, just like 2 weeks ago now, I believe it was, maybe not even 2 weeks yet, they had a big bust 30 miles north of me in Dayton, Ohio, for human trafficking. And they've arrested 162 people who were involved. And it would astound you to see this list. We're talking teachers, college administrators, politicians, military people. I mean, the list goes on, and it just astounds me how this stuff happens right under our noses.
Yeah.
And, you know, as citizens, one, we have to pay attention. As parents, we absolutely have to pay attention. And we really have to look close to home. And this is the interesting thing that I have found, because I've obviously now done a ton of research on this. You know, I only have my story in the beginning, then I had a few other stories. But most sexual trauma, in fact, to children, 93% know their perpetrator. 93%. And only 34 of that is a parent or a family member.
Wow.
The rest are all people who have access to your children.
Right.
Wow. That's a pretty high number. And so I talk to a lot of parents. So on this, I'd like to share,
absolutely,
you know, parents, pay attention to your children.
I was just going to ask you pay attention. So what are some signs that you could watch for?
Right. So watch for change in mood, especially after going to something that they really wanted to go to, and they come back and they're in a bad mood and they don't want to talk about it, and they kind of isolate themselves. That's a big clue right there. Another clue can be they're changing their friends and they're changing how they dress. Now, sometimes teenagers do this because they're just changing.
They're just teenagers and they're
just being teenagers, and they need a little bit of privacy, but you really need to watch how much they're getting of that. And you really need to have some open communication. And I would say the earliest in life of kids that you can start communication, do it and start debriefing all of the time. Like if they go stay at a friend's, when they come back, debrief them. What did they do? Who were they with? Was everything fine? Did anything uncomfortable happen? Start asking those questions. If my parents had asked that, I probably might have said something then. I might have broke then.
Right. And letting them know that they have that safe space, right? I've always done that with my son. I don't care what happens. I don't care if it was you, whatever it is. You have a safe space. And we created this time in our day where bedtime was always safe space time. Mommy wasn't mommy. Mommy was just somebody you could talk to. So mommy would shelf her mumminess and you could just talk to me. And so we've kept that even now. That's good. At 12 years old, he can ask me anything. And sometimes it's super uncomfortable because he has questions. He's 12. He's learning.
Absolutely. Stuff. Better him to learn it from you though. Correct. Right?
Right. And he has questions about like whether I've tried such and such or whatever. And I'm like, I don't want to answer that. But I want him to know that he can ask me anything and I can answer honestly. And so creating that environment that started when he was, it started when he was 4 or 5 because he went to a daycare. And it was like a summer day camp. And it was really innocent, but for him it was rather traumatic. So he was trying to get changed or go to the bathroom in a stall. And all the kids, big kids and little kids, were popping their heads and peeking on him. And then for the longest time, he felt like he couldn't, he showered with like a bathing suit on and he didn't want to show us his parts. And so for me, again, that mood or that change was like, something's happened.
Yeah.
And I needed to create a safe space for him to tell me what it was without him feeling like, you know, if somebody threatened him to not say anything. And finally he did. And thankfully there was that relief of, okay, it wasn't what I actually thought it may have been, but it was
Right.
still pretty traumatic for him to
Absolutely. And trauma is
have
trauma.
that. Right. And
Right.
so that's when it started. We started it then, and we carried out all the time.
Yeah.
Every,
And that's what I suggest you do. I did that with my own daughter. We typically did it in the car when we traveled a lot, right? Because we were driving a lot every day.
yeah.
And so it would be in there. We would have conversations, and it was a safe space. We could talk about anything.
Anything.
And I'm looking forward, so they don't even have to particularly
Yeah.
look at my face, but I could see them in the rearview mirror, right? I could see my child in the rearview mirror. So that's always a good way too, because it takes the pressure off of them to be
It's a perfect
staring
tip.
at you trying to talk. The other thing I think that's super important for parents is the threatening stuff, because literally that is why I did not tell my parents. Because when I stood up to him, he made it clear he could kill me by choking me to unconsciousness.
Right.
Okay. So, as a child, that's pretty scary.
Totally.
And, he's pretty much like, yeah, and you could die, so, and so can all your family. So that's where I struggled. It wasn't that I didn't know I could come to my family, especially my father. My mom was sorry, there's a little fly flying around here. My mom was a little bit more strict, she was harder to crack. Like I didn't feel as comfortable talking to my mother as I did my father. It was just our relationship. It's not that we had a bad one, but I could tell my dad pretty much anything.
Right.
And, the hardest part was telling him. My mom had already passed at this point. And my dad said, you knew you could come to me. Why did you not come? And I said, because I truly believed he could have hurt you or me or both of us. And I felt like I was protecting. And he said, I wish I'd have known that, because I would have convinced you that I could take care of that. Like,
and he would have, right?
So,
Yeah.
right. So I think we have to come across to our children, no matter what someone is saying to them, ultimately we are the great protector, and we will go to whatever it takes to protect everybody, and know that they're going to maybe tell you not to tell, but you need to tell. So I think that that's an important point to bring home.
Yeah.
But
my husband's great at that. My husband
good.
is a good protector, and he always says stuff like that. Like, he would, if anything ever happened to either of us, we know
Right.
the lengths that he would take
to
keep us safe, to keep us happy, to keep people out of our space for whatever reason. Yeah. So
that's important. I think that's an important point. And the other thing is to know that the threatening can go on for a very long time. Even though they've told you, they could still be being threatened. My uncle, of course, I didn't tell anyone, but my uncle threatened me all the way up until pretty much this happened. But the crowning moment for me was when he showed up in 2013 with his wife in support. My mom was dying in hospice, and he came in support, but that's not what he came for. He's around the corner in my ear, keep your mouth shut, because he knows people do deathbed confessions, right? And he knows my mom's dying.
wow.
So it was even that far out. I mean, we're talking, the abuse stopped in 1979, the physical abuse, but the mental abuse carried all the way into 2013. He was still going to levels to keep people quiet. And that must have been a full-time job for him, to be honest.
I was
There's
just
so
going to say,
people.
it must have been exhausting for him to keep at everyone.
And the interesting thing is,
that's so many people. Yeah.
The people I have talked to who actually showed up in court, because we actually had 22 women file complaints and show up in court to stand in support, but everyone said the same thing. Everyone, right? They all thought they were the only one.
The only ones.
He threatened them. He had this thing about crazy eyes. I'll be watching you with my crazy eyes. And we weren't allowed to talk pre-court. And so none of us did, because we didn't want to mess up the case.
Right.
And at the end, the judge wanted us to write victim statements to be read in court to him. And he made him sit there for 3 hours and listen to these. But the crazy thing for me was, as I was listening to it and processing it, everyone had pretty much the same story.
Right. They're all
Over and over and over. So he used the same tactics over and over and over. So I just say that so people kind of understand what can happen
Yeah, no, that's great, because
in
we've
these
got a lot of
situations.
parent listeners too, right? Like moms with children, and here's the other thing that's really important. And I think we know that now with the onset of things that come out in the hockey world too, but boys are equally can be victimized as girls.
And let me say, he did both.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah. Boys and girls. There are boy victims as well. They've not been as open or as forthright, but we know there are. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so boys are at risk too. I mean, we know that even in the churches, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so you have to know who has access to your children.
Yes.
And I would say, as a parent also, you need to pay attention and like see those interactions. Like go to the practices.
Yes.
What are you noticing during the practices? Like, is there inappropriate touching? Is there favoritism? Is there, pats on the butt as opposed to a high five? And there are things to watch for. But you really need to know who has access to your children and what's going on during the time that they have access to your child.
Yes.
Truly.
Absolutely. Because even though, like up here, I'm not sure if it's the same down there in America, but in Canada, in the minor hockey world and most minor sports actually, they have to be screened and they have to take like tests and exams, but that doesn't mean anything if it's flying under the radar. If they've never been caught for something, not going to be on the record. So you do have to be vigilant, and you do have to be watchful. And again, circle back to that open lines of communication with your kids.
Yeah.
Let them know that they can trust you with anything. And no matter what they tell you, it's not going to affect how you think of them or hurt you in any way. Yes, of course, if something was to happen to my son, that would be devastating. But you fight through it for them. You don't make sure that they don't feel like they're protecting you, because that's what was happening for you with your dad, especially.
Yeah. Like I felt I was protecting them in this situation, and I couldn't come forth in this. And, you feel very alone. You feel very dark in there. And if a child makes any mention of suicide, that's a huge red flag. Even if it's as simple as off the cuff, I should just kill myself, even if they say things like that, or I wish I wasn't here anymore, I wish I wasn't born. All of those are super red flags that people really need to start diving into.
Yeah, something's up. Or early drug use, early experimenting with, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. And yes, there is just the curiosity too, especially my son at his age
Sure.
group. If they have older siblings and they're curious about what's going on, but usually, and it doesn't even have to be sexual trauma, it could be
any
trauma of some kind.
Yes.
In their life.
It could be bullying.
Yes.
It could be bullying from school. It could be a traumatic event that happened. It could be a domestic violent event. Let's say, a mother was beat up by the boyfriend or the father or whatever, and they witnessed that. It's all of these things that can happen. And I wanted to say something on the alcohol and drugs. When it comes to trauma, they're not doing it to experiment. The reason they go to drugs and alcohol is to forget.
Yes.
They want to turn this off for a few minutes. And that's exactly what I did. When I went to college and I had access finally to alcohol and drugs, I tried it all. I wasn't very smart about it. Like, I drank too much before, right?
Yeah.
Lost a whole night that I don't even remember.
Yeah.
I took drugs. I used drugs to try to kill myself because I finally just couldn't stand what was happening up here, and I did not know how to make it be quiet.
Yeah. You couldn't let it simmer, let it shut off. And
right.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. It's not just playing around with it. So it's like watching your child. If your child's happy and they go smoke a joint, and they're like, well, my buddies did it, so
right.
I decided to try it.
That peer pressure
probably pretty
element.
good.
Yeah.
But if you notice that they're changing, their whole attitude is changing, their grades are dropping, they're like, you're seeing a pattern suddenly of a slide downhill.
Yeah.
That's where you need to pay attention. Something more is going on there.
Yeah. You need to come in and help them out.
Yes.
So circling back to the work you did with Dylan and Pursuit Institute and the work we do as a whole, what was like the number one thing that you learned? I know you kind of talked about it was almost like in increments and steps to get you to where you are now. What was the first step? What was the first tool to overcome that chatter in your brain, to shut it off and override it with a different thought pattern?
Well, the first step started before I actually even did the program. And I tell people this a lot, and this happens with anybody of trauma. You lose trust first.
Yes.
You lose trust in systems, in people. And eventually, if it sits long enough in you and you haven't processed it, you lose trust in yourself. You lose trust that you can't even make a freaking decision. And you live in indecision. Right? And that creates that loop as well. Well, the first thing you need to get out of trauma is trust.
Right. Yes.
And that's what's so hard. And Delynn gave me trust. And she, I believe, even said, trust me. Trust this process. Just give it a try. Put some trust in it. And so that was actually the first step, to be honest. And then beyond that, it was learning that I have been programmed this way.
Yes. Yep.
And it's habit of thought, right? So we have these thought habits and we just come at them the same way all the time and then through that lens, but we can change that. And it was learning how to change that. And probably the best thing that I learned, and I still use probably on a daily basis sometimes, is the law of polarity. Because for every thought, there is an equal and opposite thought. And I learned I don't have to think I'm unworthy. If I hear that, I can say, wait, stop. No, I'm worthy. And I can start affirming that. So that was one of the biggest steps. Once I started learning, I could flip these and saying these affirmations, doing some mirror work, and then kind of diving down deep into this and unraveling things through the whole process. But it takes time, for sure.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
It wasn't.
Your trauma wasn't created in a day. I mean, it started in one moment and then just carried on, right? But and that the years that you held it in, it's not going to go away with one affirmation, right?
No, absolutely not.
No.
Not at all. But I will say, in the beginning, I did the work partly, right?
Okay. Yes.
I kind of did the work, right? Because again, I probably wasn't fully trusting. But then as I stepped further and further into it and I got the wins and I got to see some of the changes starting to happen in my life, I bought into it more. I trusted it more. And to the point where I've been doing the work for 3 years now and I am all in, like I am 100% in. I do what they have taught me to do every day. I do my affirmations every day. I visualize my future every day. I do the work. So I'm 3 years in, but I can tell you at 3 years, I am 180 degrees opposite of what I was. I am the opposite of what my trauma was. I'm the complete opposite. I am the law of polarity. Exactly. Yeah. So it's possible. Now, I tell people the concepts are easy. I mean, the
They
laws of
really
the
are.
universe are the
Yep.
laws of the universe. They don't change. They
really
never change. There's a season. That's one law of
Yep.
seasons. Fall comes before winter every time.
Every
We're
time.
in fall right now. We know winter's coming next, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
we know these things. The law of polarity is the same every time. So that's easy. But the hard work is studying yourself and
Yes.
starting to learn what are your habits, and then slowly taking the time to change those habits one by one by one.
Yeah.
But I can tell you it's worth it.
Absolutely. And it's defining, maybe even like yourself. There was one major weed that was planted in your life that had its own root system, and it took over several avenues of your life, your worth and your confidence and your love for yourself and all these things, and it made you protect yourself in certain ways and not be smart about other ways. Right? And it's this one root that stemmed from something that wasn't even something that you caused, right? And you know what, as I say that, that's the truth about all our weeds and all of our habits that we have within ourselves. They're not caused within something that we did. It's always an external source. It's always what someone else has said to us and the way we perceived it and responded to it and felt about it, or what someone's done to us, or something we witnessed, or something, even a food that we've tasted, right? It's all reaction to an external event in our lives. And now you have to go in, you have the responsibility. If you want your life to change, if you want to thrive instead of survive, you have to go in and witness what it is that's stopping you from growing, or keeping you small or in a comfort zone, or how you're talking to yourself and how you're listening, because you're always listening to yourself. How's your body listening? How's it moving into the next thing it wants to do based on your thoughts, based on your fears, based on all of the things, right? And you're right, once you start studying yourself and start a path of growth, really is what's happening, in a path of awareness, there's no turning back.
There is no turning back.
There is no turning back. And even, I'm sure, like you and like all of us, we do have times where we feel like we've regressed a little, but then you notice it instantly and you're like, oh, here I am again. Let's keep pushing forward. Or what stopped me this time? What did I trip up on? What weed needs to be examined and pulled, and what new habit needs to be replaced. And there's something so important to be said about affirmations. I know there's so many people that think it's like this willy-nilly, ridiculous pseudoscience thing, but your brain is being affirmed information all the time. And chances are you're affirming the same things all the time to yourself. And you're creating these neural pathways of that information. And so in order to create new ones, you have to go in and affirm the opposite.
You absolutely do. And there's something called neuroplasticity. And so that is the study of this. And it has shown that you actually can reprogram your subconscious mind. We have studies now that prove this. You can rewire essentially your brain differently. And so that's why work is so important, because people don't understand that. And they just live in the same bad affirmations. I'm broken. I'm no good. I'm unworthy. I'm this, I'm that. But you don't have to live there. And you can start using those affirmations. There's only 2 ways, by the way, that you change your subconscious mind. So let's bring that out for people. One is a sudden event with a lot of emotion attached to it. Well, there's the definition of trauma right there.
Yeah.
Of any trauma, right? So that automatically gets programmed into your brain, and you start reacting from that. The other way to change that is constant spaced repetition, right? And we know that that works, and we can actually prove that because when you were born, you never knew your name. And your mama or whoever raised you started calling you.
Yeah.
Melissa, 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 Melissa. And one day you went, oh,
that must
you looked
be
up
me.
at her. That must be me.
Yeah.
And then eventually you learned your name that they're calling you is Melissa.
That's right.
So they programmed that, right? And so we've heard all of these things as kids growing up. That's what school does, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's that constant space repetition. And so we know it works. So that's why this work is so important for people with trauma, because it's here and they can utilize it to change.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I know for myself, and I talk a lot about this, constant time space repetition, by the way. People are probably like, we get it. But for myself, mine was medical trauma that I honestly didn't even realize I had until someone pointed it out to me. They were like, Melissa, that's not normal. It's not normal to be poked and prodded and x-rayed and feeding tubed and portacath and PICC lined and, all the things that I endured my entire life. That's not normal.
Right.
And I normalized it, which I think we do with all sorts of trauma, right? We normalize it. Like, this is my life now, and all is well now. And it's not normal. And because it wasn't normal, you develop certain coping mechanisms to keep yourself safe, to keep yourself small, so you don't get sick, so you don't get poked at, so you don't get hospitalized, so you don't have to eat the crappy hospital food and all the things, right? So speaking of trust, it wasn't even a loss of trust of anyone in particular, but definitely I feel like it went right away, a loss of trust in myself and my ability to be able to keep myself healthy.
Yeah.
And even still, I get a bit tripped up when I'm a little bit off or congested, like I have been this week. I start sliding down into those old patterns of like panic almost, right? And I have to take a breath and remember, you are healthy. You have the tools. You are healthy. And just reaffirming a different thought pattern. And let me tell you, every single time it works. Every single time. Every single time.
And the nice thing about this is the more you come back to that, because it's not, let's be clear here. It's not that you're not going to backslide.
Totally.
It's not that you're going to fall back into another thought habit that's not serving you, that you've seen before, right? Because we're never going to get them 100% out.
Right.
So it could come up, especially if, a little bit more stress comes down upon you. But the nice part about this is you have the tools, you can start changing it, and the time space is very short then.
Correct.
Right? You recognize it faster, you start using the tools, and you flip it faster.
Correct.
So what would have taken me months to years I can flip in hours and minutes.
Right. Exactly.
I can recognize it much faster. I recognized something the other day, and I was with my business partner, and it came out. I don't even remember now what I said, but I said it out loud. And then I went, why did I say that? It was very negative.
Right.
It was very negative, right? And I don't live in that world. But it just like popped out of me. And so I did some work to figure it out. And there was a weed there still on this particular topic. And I just had to go in and give some honor to that and just think about that and break that down and see how it wasn't serving me, but it was still living in me, and pull that weed and make those affirmations to flip that.
Yes. Yeah, that's beautiful. I often picture myself kind of standing with my younger self, right? That's where the weed started. And I just kind of embrace her and say, like, I get it. You're scared or you're worried or you have fears or doubts or what have you, but I've got you. We've got it now. We've got the tools now. We don't have to slip back into that negative thinking. We don't have to go back into that worry or that panic of a cough turning into weeks of IV therapy in a hospital away from your family, all that stuff. It doesn't have to go there. So let's do this. I've got you, watch. And then sure enough, it's like, oh, okay. It's that surrender piece of, okay, you are correct. You do have it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. That is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And the other thing, well, I'd like to drop right here is about forgiveness.
Yes.
And forgiveness is key in this. And I want people to understand that. Number one, you need to forgive yourself for whatever the trauma was and for whatever you have experienced up until this moment. You know, if your life was, terrible because of what you went through and it affected a lot of people, okay, you did the best you could. You survived. Now let's thrive. But you got to start by forgiving yourself. And if your trauma was caused by another person, you have to forgive them. And let me be very clear here. That is not saying it was okay that they committed trauma against you, right? Right. They do not get off from that. But you're forgiving them for what they did. They can go and deal with what they did with their own karma. They'll have their own karmic path to deal with, right?
Yeah.
And or whatever you believe in, like, what the future could hold for someone of that caliber. Right. But you have to forgive yourself, and you have to forgive somebody if they did the trauma to you, or you're not going to move forward into thriving. Right. And this can be very difficult for people. And it takes a little time of understanding and doing this work to realize how important this is. I have people who still don't understand why I could say I forgave my uncle.
Well, because I didn't do it for cord, him. Right? Like, you were bonded by this trauma cord from him to you. And by forgiving him, it gave you the power to have the scissors and just cut it. Yep. So now he gets to live a life of shame. People he'll probably go to jail and all the things, but
he's in jail now.
Yeah. So that section, and then if he ever gets out, there's that shame for the rest of his life that people know who he is. Yeah. And do you really want to be attached to that? Still, no. And so you're right. No. That forgiveness piece, even if it's just like, I forgive that just not even you as a person, and I don't need to like you as a person, and that was terrible, but I'm letting it go. I'm releasing it. I'm no longer going to be tethered to you. And I forgive myself for ever feeling like I had to be.
Right.
Yeah. So
and I forgive myself for all those years.
Yeah.
Well,
so how did you forgive him? Like, I know some people are like, what? I could never. And yes, those are very valid feelings. Yes, absolutely.
I had those feelings at one time. And I think it was just, going through this work and really diving deep and doing a lot of journal work and talking to a lot of people during this, learning that the importance of you have to let things go in order to move on. Yes. And as long as I held unforgiveness for him, right? Like you say, I'm staying attached to that. I'm living still within that, because trauma does not have to define you. Right. It's actually a moment in time. It's an event, and it's a moment in time, and it might be multiple moments. It might be multiple years like mine was, but that still didn't have to define me for the next 45 years. Right? I could have processed that a whole lot sooner. I just didn't have the tools back then, and the support. Yeah. So I think it comes as part of doing this work, and once you start trusting and you start understanding all of the pieces that are important and pulling those weeds, and you're seeing suddenly, well, that's a weed. I have unforgiveness living in there. How's that serving me? Right. Yeah. It's not, because if I think about him in an unforgiving way, I'm in a negative mindset right then, right?
Absolutely. And then he still has power over you, right? Yeah. There's that you have power over me still. And to release that and give that forgiveness and let go totally takes his control away forever.
Yeah.
And that's what you want.
Yeah. And that's how I became empowered.
Yes.
I took my trauma and used it for my power.
Yes. Yeah.
Not having my power taken from me. And so that's why that was key. That was one of those weeds. It had to come out. It didn't serve me. And of course, it wasn't a first weed I pulled. We know that, right? That's a little deeper work, and it takes a little bit of time to get there, but it's very important.
Yeah. So Cheryl, tell everyone that's listening. So that's where you were in your life, but I think it's so amazing where you are, even just in the short time frame that I've known you for the last, I don't know, like 6-7 months, where you are right now in all of this and how life has unfolded for you now that you've taken your power back, stand firm in who you are. You've healed a ton of things. Now, share where you're at.
I would love to. So one, I am totally and completely happy. I love my life right now. And, I feel younger than I've ever been. I feel very vibrant and vital, but I was able to retire as a nurse. It just didn't feel like it was serving me anymore, so that I could step into my passion, which is building my coaching platform to help people with this. Right. And so in that, and doing this work, some amazing things have happened for me. I'm actually ready to fly out tomorrow to Tyler, Texas. So with all of this, I am really following the human trafficking world, and I align with a group called A21.org, and they are a nonprofit that are on the streets pulling people out of human trafficking. And I have another business that gives money to them as well, that I have too. So I'm aligned with them. And Saturday, this coming Saturday, is the nationwide walk to bring awareness for human trafficking. So one of my business partners organized a walk in Tyler, Texas, and I've been asked to do the keynote speech for that. So I'm pretty excited about that. And so I'm going to do that. And then I had no idea there's a network called Win-Win Women Network, and it's actually live streamed on Roku TV, YouTube, and Apple TV. And you can actually watch it live too. And they do TV shows. And it's all about women who are helping women. And somebody saw my story, and they reached out to me and said, we think you would be amazing to be a TV show host. So I have my own TV show now every Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you follow me on my Facebook, there's always a link there where you can jump in live. And the nice thing about this one is you can come in live and stay after the 30-minute live show and have questions and answers. So I will actually be there answering questions. And if you want a little coaching on site, I'm happy to give some tips and tricks there. So that came along. And so some amazing things are really happening because of this, and more opportunities. And next year, I've just rented a theater because I have committed to having International Women's Day in a city next to me in Middletown, Ohio on March 3rd. And people are already stepping up to help with that. And so it's been a really fun process to see everything that's kind of falling into place. And it's just happening so easy. And I just love that. And it's not that I'm trying to say I'm all that by all this happening, but for the joyful part of me is my mission and my passion is all of this is to not let this voice be silenced. And I want to speak on the stages of the world globally, like around the world, because this is an around the world problem, right? And women or people of trauma, not just women, people of trauma need this help. They need to know that there's a way out of this through our mind and live a better life. And so this is what I'm after here. And there's rumors that they told me to save some dates in April. There's going to be a big conference in the Netherlands, and it's possible I could be speaking in the Netherlands on a stage live.
Oh my
So
gosh, Cheryl, that's
I know.
amazing. Talk
So
about
it's
the law of polarity, really. Like
right.
where you were even before 2018, right? Well,
Hmm.
even before 2020, before you started this work, where you
Hmm.
were to where you are now, major law of polarity.
Yeah,
But
major.
that's how it happens when you change the vision in your mind and the mind racing about certain thoughts. When you change those thought patterns, you change your life.
You
You
do.
set yourself on a new timeline, essentially.
Hmm.
And it's so exciting. You've literally quantum leapt, like from even when I started with the Pursuit Institute, well, it would be a year ago, November. I think I probably met you shortly after that. Like even from that
Hmm.
point to now, you're
Yes.
just a different human.
Yes.
And really, you only retired from nursing like what, the spring?
February. Yeah, in the
February.
spring. In February.
Yeah.
And all of this
So
has happened since then.
since then.
And let me just say, just so you guys know, because nobody knows me, right? On this,
Right.
you're seeing me as I am today. This is not who I was 3 years ago. I was a hot mess express. I was in a deep depression. My best friend will tell you I was a shell, and like there was no life, like in my eyes or anything. Like I was just very dull and in a very deep, dark place. And I thought, you know, life was terrible. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it at that time. So I want you to know, if you can't see it, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Trust in me. If you don't trust in anyone else, place a little bit of trust in me and have a conversation. Reach out. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Um, Melissa can put up my Calendly link with
Yes.
this, and you can book a call with me and we can process some things. But just trust, there is a process. I guarantee it, there's a process, and if you do the work, you will make massive change.
Absolutely. And I'll put all your links and your contact info and that's a great idea. Your link to book a call to Cheryl has helped so many of us. Even I know there's lots of coaches, fellow coaches, that reach out to you for
Mm-hmm.
just some guidance on this subject of trauma, because somewhere along the lines all of us have a piece of it somewhere. Whether it's big T, little T, right? Some of us didn't realize we had it and then discovered it. We've had conversations with us about that. And she's great at what she does. And I am so honored that you were on today, and all of the amazing tips that you gave parents to watch for. That's so important. We could save some lives, and we could really help our own children, because it does start here at home.
It does. Yep, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. I so appreciate you being here today.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much.